Long Take Review, where 4 college professors talk film, providing insight, not assigning homework. I'm your host, Jen Sobczak-Bankard, and I'm here with 3 aspiring comedians, emphasis on aspiring. First, he is postmodernism, he's avant-garde, he's Warhol. It's PT McNiff. How's it going, PT?
I would like to feed your fingertips. To feed your fingertips to the Wolverines. To the Wolverines. I'm doing well, Jen. How are you?
Perfect. If I didn't know what that was referencing, I would be concerned. And he believes there's a place for the Muppets on TV. It's Greg Cass. How's it going, Greg?
You know, I was thinking, why don't we punt, Jen? We should run the dress rehearsal and claw back a win next podcast. I'm good, Jen. How are you doing?
That felt very real. I'm doing great. And last but not least, everyone wants him to fail, but he doesn't know. It's Antonio Elefano. How are you, Antonio?
Writers on the 17th floor tied a belt around Big Bird's neck and hung him from my dressing room door. I'm doing okay.
That's a miracle. Listeners, those were all references to the film we are here to review today, Saturday Night, which as of this recording just opened in limited release, but by the time that this episode drops on our feed, it will likely be after October 11th and therefore in its wide release. And so you should, by the time you're listening to this, you should be able to go see it in theaters wherever you are. Jason Reitman's film drops us into the very first night that SNL aired in 1975. It is kind of like an in real time pressure cooker hour and a half leading up to when the show started to air. So if you're listening to us for the first time, we will have a spoiler-free section designed for those who have not yet seen the film. And with a very clear spoiler alert, we will shift into spoiler mode for the rest of the show. PT, if listeners think that we're actually funny after listening to this episode, what can they do?
Well, when they have finished laying out all the bricks on their stage and they want to check out new episodes, they can follow us on the Long Take Review wherever they get their podcasts. We host the feed on Jen's Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. But you can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Overcast, and many more. Wherever you get podcasts, you can find us. You can also follow us on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review, and on Letterboxd at LTRPod is the account. Or you can search the hashtag LTRPod to see the movies that each of us individually have been watching. Jen?
Thanks, PT. So let's just get into it. What was your general reaction to Saturday Night? I know for some of us, like Antonio, who almost drafted this in his hype draft, but we convinced him not to because we weren't sure if it was coming out this year. That's on us. Don't look at me like he. I know PT says he's an adult and makes his own choices, but we influenced him. So I know that some of us were really anticipating this movie. What did you think?
Sorry, I thought it was incredibly fun. I'll say, I said this in my Letterboxd review, like the first hour or so, it felt a little like a retro 30 Rock episode. and I don't mean that in a bad way. I love 30 Rock. I think that when you're dealing with something as big as like this event, like, this is a 50-year-old show, you're only going to be able to scratch the surface of a lot of things, like a lot of like its large and sprawling cast and the people who made this happen. But I thought Jason Reitman did a really nice job of giving every character a moment or two to really make clear just how special this group of people really was. Like the show it portrays, not every joke lands. But in the end, I thought it was just a really effective love letter to this 50-year program and a tribute to the audacity of its ambition. What do you all think?
Yeah, I agree. I was pretty worried about this movie that it was going to be sort of an empty nostalgia fest with kind of awkward impressions of people who are, many of whom are still alive and who we all kind of have known through pop culture. But, it really transcends those worries and, lets itself just be this sort of backstage farce that has this sort of, the nostalgia of like, don't you like remember all the times you've watched Saturday Night Live and this is where it all started. But it's a lot more just about like people trying to get together and put on a show in that classic Muppets fashion, but with mostly humans in this one that, I think really works well. And, I guess my really short take is this is the only good thing to come out of Jason Reitman's work with Dan Aykroyd around the Ghostbusters franchise. Greg?
Whoa.
Wow.
Not fired.
All right, listeners, I just want to talk to you for a moment. Hold on. Let me turn my chair around backwards and lean on it to give you some straight rap. There are going to be a lot of people out there on the streets telling you that this is just kind of soulless hagiography and it's a tribute to a man who doesn't need any more tributes. He sleeps at night on a pile of money that he's created for one of the most harmful industrial companies in the world. And they'll tell you that you're going to sit through sketches that you know better versions of endlessly and just have a terrible time in the uncanny valley of seeing these poor impressions. Those people, they may not be your friends, but they're not wrong. This is all those things. And yet I will tell you, I unreservedly thought this was absolutely fantastic. I left the theater on such a high. Look, listeners, we're not spoiling anything. You know the last words of this movie. You know right now how this movie ends. And yet when it happens, I was like dancing in the aisles. I was all in and just so excited and so happy. So we'll talk a little more tonight, I think, about what our own personal histories are with Saturday Night Live. But I will say that everything about this worked for me. I really have become a huge fan of the lead actor, whose last name I'm forgetting, Gabriel LaBelle. Thank you. Sorry.
Baby Spielberg. How could you forget?
Baby Spielberg, absolutely. And star of Snack Shack, which I will continue to recommend until you shell out your $5 and rent on iTunes. So I just thought it was so much fun. Is this the best picture of the year? It is not. But would you absolutely have a great time out seeing this movie? Yes. Jen, now you turn around your chair and give the straight talk to our listeners.
This might be premature, but I'm going to say I do not have a particularly deep attachment to SNL. I always enjoy it when I see it. It's not necessarily something I seek out. And especially it's this early history, I am not particularly knowledgeable about. So I went into this kind of like with pretty like low to neutral expectations, just in terms of like, I don't have any hopes and dreams about this movie. But I have to say that the premise of it, that it is this kind of relentless, manic sort of jazz drum solo feeling kind of run for the 90 or so minutes really, really worked for me. But at the same time, I can see why a lot of critics are saying that it kind of has a ceiling in terms of like what it is trying to say. And hopefully we can talk about that later in spoiler section, like what we think this is actually trying to say about SNL or about comedy or about, whatever it's trying to say. But I do think that there's an inherent limitation in the kind of parlor trick of like, let's not look away until like the air light flashes, right? And I think that's the joy of this movie, is being able to see how crazy and chaotic it is and how it never lets up. I think I like to brag that I know myself well, because earlier when we talked about this movie, before any of us had seen it, I said, well, I heard it's kind of like an Aaron Sorkin-esque, like walk and talk, kind of like frantic, quippy dialogue, everything's happening at once kind of movie. And I'm like, I'm going to love that. And it largely panned out. It's very true. But the thing that I actually didn't expect was that because I didn't have the strong attachment to SNL and very much early SNL, like it actually took me a little while to figure out who's who for some of these, which is probably embarrassing. But by the end, I was like so charmed by the pure charisma of all these performances, even if I knew that they were impressions of other people. You know what I mean? Like I really got invested in the like, they didn't feel like impressions to me. They felt kind of like uncanny possession in some cases. And so that was also really enjoyable. So yeah, overall, I'd say great. The extent to which this is like artistically valuable as a project, we can debate, but as a pure entertainment and something that just like made me very happy sitting in my movie theater seat, 100%. Now we want, usually it's not me jumping the gun for recommendation algorithms. but now I've done it twice, where I start talking about who this movie's for. Apparently it was for me and I didn't know. I guess I have an answer to that question of, do you need to be an SNL superfan to appreciate this movie? Like, how does, some of you refer to the nostalgia factor, but like, how is that actually playing out in terms of who you would recommend this movie to?
Well, I do think maybe your experience speaks to that. I would most recommend this to people who like that backstage, like where we're trying to work towards putting on a show, kind of thing. That's about like, you know, performing and like the industry and, you know, the company, the network wants us to do this, but we're trying to do that, and we're trying to change the rules of the blah blah blah, like that kind of, you know, I think that maybe is more at the heart of the appeal than necessarily like you need to know, like, you know, all these things. You need to know that Garrett Morris was a playwright, like who was brought in. He was 10 years older than anybody else. Now, maybe I did know that, and maybe that was something that I knew. So it was hitting sort of nostalgia buttons. But I think there were a couple times where I was a little bit like, yeah, okay. Where I was like, they're referencing things where like, to me, it felt really obvious. But then like, I was realizing that like, oh, it's only obvious because I probably know too much about this. Like that's a reference to a sketch that was probably like done a year and a half later, that like, it's as if like, oh, that's them throwing around jokes. And that would later grow into that famous sketch that, if you don't know, that was just like a funny exchange between people. So I think there is something to it. I do think there's a little bit of a degree of starting to feel like, oh, right, I'm old now because they're doing you know, they're this thing that was a little before my time, but like I grew up with the reruns of this being on a lot, and now they're like doing a hazy like recreation of it. It's just like, oh god, like that's what I get for being in my mid 40s. So I, you know, there's a little bit of the nostalgia only works if you want to embrace that it's at a nostalgia stage, I guess, and if you want to see it. But I think I think it's more about the you know, wanting to see the backstage sort of shenanigans, which I agree are not like deep. I don't think they're deep like statements about artistic worth and truth or whatever. It's just a fun time of like people trying to throw a show together. If you happen to have like strong affinity for Dan Aykroyd or, you know, Saturday Night Live era Chevy Chase and Gilda Radner and all of that, then I think that helps it. But I don't think that's necessary, or even may not even be preferable, if seeing the imitations of those is going to make you sort of recoil instead of embrace.
A few years ago, there was that movie, Being the Ricardos, about Lucille Ball and the sort of like the backstage stuff with that. And one of the primary complaints about that movie, and I kind of had it too, was that, you know, you had all of this behind the scenes drama about like, you know, our most beloved comedian perhaps ever, but it was like not funny. And it was like, how can you make a movie about Lucy that was just not funny? So what I liked about this was that it was all the backstage stuff, and there was all this stuff. There was some stuff that I didn't know, a lot of stuff that I didn't know that was interesting. But it still retained the spirit of a Saturday Night Live. It was still fun, right? So yeah, I think that this is like Being the Ricardos if that movie were funny. This is like Studio 60 if that were funny. That's my contribution. What do you think, Greg?
I mean, that's just brutal, because Sorkin really thought Studio 60 was funny, right? Like, if you listen to the interviews at the time, he's like, don't worry, we hired comedy writers. The sketches are going to be really funny. Whereas 30 Rock, I think, smartly played it as, we'll just make the skits look so stupid that you realize this is not a serious show, which really worked. I'm going to agree with what both of you said, but I will specifically say I think this works really well for people. You know, you two, I think you were both 35 when SNL premiered, but Jen and I are much, much younger and hipper. So, you know, I only knew SNL as an institution, right? My first exposure to it, you know, when my older sister had her friends over and they'd put it on and they'd forgotten I was sitting on the floor over in the corner, or like when you the first sleepovers with my buddies where we got to stay up and watch it. It was already an institution, and it was like SNL, and it's like, as it always is, it's the debate of, is the quality going down? but it just seems like such a permanent fixture. It's how like The Simpsons has become, which that's my version of what PT was talking about. It's like, we can't be nostalgic for The Simpsons. That's still a new thing. But I think that's exactly like, if you've only known it as the institution and it just feels inevitable, like come Saturday night, it will be on. You knew as soon as the recent presidential debate happened, you're like, can't wait to see what SNL does with it. It'll be lackluster, but I'll still laugh. And like there's just that spirit of, it's always been a part of our cultural landscape. I really think that's a sweet spot of, okay, so maybe you haven't read the behind the scene book and the oral history, and you don't know, like, this barely made it on and is kind of this unique little cultural entity that just somehow is just cheap enough that they keep it on the air forever. And I think that to me was the sweet spot that I felt would be great. So like, I have people in my family who are like a little younger than me who, probably don't watch SNL, but did at some point for a little while. And to be able to be like, you gotta see, like, hey, 50 years is a lot, right? They're in their 50th season. And so let's just kind of see where it came from and how it worked.
To add additional things sort of based on what both of you were saying, I think an element that works here, and maybe this is why it feels like 30 Rock instead of Studio 60, which a whole other long TV review was talking about how disappointed I was by Studio 60. I was really excited for that, and I thought 30 Rock was going to be terrible, and I couldn't have been more wrong. But that, there are these moments where you have Lorne Michaels, who is the main character, central character of this, which makes total sense. And people keep being like, what's the show about? What are you trying to do? And he always kind of has these like broad, big artistic statements, and this sort of like, you won't know it until you see it. Like, I'll show you once the show happens. And I think there are critics who are responding to that as like, get over yourself, like calm down. And that's the like, it could feel very self-serious and like that this is important. This means something. This is important. But I think that that's always undercut by people making fun of him. And like, it always seems like he's saying that because he doesn't know the real answer. And he, there is a moment where he gives, I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say, there's a moment where he kind of formulates the closest we get to his actual true answer after dodging that question for like 82 minutes. But like, even then it doesn't feel like it's so like, God, how important is this? And how central has this been to our culture? So much as like, what a weird idea that you had, that like, you thought you could do this. Like, all right, I guess we'll give it a shot. And like, I think that level being at the core of the story is why this works, instead of going in that other direction of just being a hagiography of Lorne Michaels and this show as an institution. So I think, at the core, like that's the smart choice. And so if you're worried that it's going to fall in that other sort of self-serious direction, don't worry about it. It doesn't really do that. The degree to which it does, you can overlook to just enjoy the fun of the experience.
Yeah, and I'd say that the big difference, I'm trying to piece together everything everyone's saying. So Antonio comparing Studio 60 and being in the Ricardos with this, and then what you're saying about like is it important with a capital I, and how much is the movie actually trying to tell us that versus just showing that they're just faking it until they make it. I feel like that is kind of the really big tonal difference between this and what it could have been, because this version of the SNL story is not afraid to just be weird and random. Right? Like, there are many scenes where the camera just pans over and it's like, who knows what these people are doing, but that's kind of the point. You know what I mean? And I really like that about it. That it's like, you have the two writers who are like, where's the can of blood? And they're just, the whole time they're trying to spray it. And then, that's a spoiler, I guess. But
future senator, the writer of the show.
Yeah. Senator Al Franken.
Right. So yeah, and whereas I think Studio 60 and being the Ricardos was trying to do a dramatic storytelling about comedy, right? This is trying to do a mostly comedic, but occasionally with moments of poignancy, but maybe, who knows, question mark, like, but still at its core, it's trying to be the thing that it was. And I think that's kind of that's what I see as being the difference. The last thing I'll say before we move on to spoiler mode, I think, is if you are feeling like, who else do we have other than Zendaya and Timothée Chalamet, right? This movie, I feel like, is full of people who are about to kind of make their big break and become potentially movie stars because their performances are so strong. But I went back and I'm like, well, surely this must be a person I know. And I went back and I'm like, no, they were on a couple of episodes of Law and Order. I guess not. You know what I mean? Like, so I thought that was really exciting. Maybe I'm just missing something on their IMDb page that makes them more well known. But
I forget who said this. I was someone's Letterboxd review or a print review that I read of this that said this is going to be a movie sort of like Short Term 12, where like you're going to look back in like 10 years and be like, I can't believe all these people were in this one movie, because the vibe feels like most of these people are going to pop and have this substantial career that you're going to be surprised they were all together once.
Which is appropriate. Saturday Night Live, a big springboard for a lot of actors.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing what this kid Willem Dafoe does. I think he's got a real shot, and we'll see if he can do anything with this.
I just wish someone would give him a job. I wish they'd give him a chance.
He was in 3 movies this year so far. Like, that's not who I mean, obviously. Jeez. The trailer for this movie, if you've seen it, is really leaning on the 2 young actors that they think that you might know. So Gabriel LaBelle, right, who had a big break in The Fabelmans and has been in, Snack Shack, which apparently is now on Prime to stream. So if in case, we can all cash in on what Greg's saying now.
So I can be even more insulted when you don't watch it.
When we don't watch it, yeah.
Got it. Yeah, yes. Yeah. How is Love Lies Bleeding, you 3? Yeah, how is Love Lies Bleeding?
I watched it. It was actually only okay.
Ooh,
sorry, Greg.
Okay, we don't have time to get into that right now. But my point is, Cooper Hoffman, Gabriel LaBelle, right? Those are the 2 relatively, out of all the young cast, relatively most recognizable people. But like, there are so many other really good performances in this by actors that I'm excited to see in other things now. And so, that's my last point.
I'm sorry to extend the pre-spoiler boat thing a little bit more, but I will just note Lamore Morris was on New Girl for the entire run of New Girl, and Dylan O'Brien was on Teen Wolf. It was in the Maze Runner movies, so they're sort of known as well, but not at the same sort of film level. They're in things that wouldn't have been covered on the Long Take Review, is what we're trying to say. So they've broken through. They're at this next level.
The Rachel Senow erasure is the one that's bothering me. She's been in so many good movies, and Bottoms reunion between her and Kaya Gerber. I'm not sure they share any scenes, but so yes, also, absolutely some rising stars. They're all rising. Nobody's mischaracterized that, but there are some proven.
There's a young playwright named Tracy Letts who has one scene.
Okay,
if anyone's ever heard of him. I do want to note. Yeah, I do want to note that
we're going to spoiler mode. You've insulted me too much. Guess I'm in charge. I'm in charge now. Okay. All right. I didn't even give the warning we were going to spoiler mode. If you haven't seen A Saturday Night, sorry, I just got so mad at PT that I had to do it. If you have not seen Saturday Night and you do not want it spoiled, please turn back now. So, since we are kind of scrutinizing my statement about the cast of this, who's your MVP or who? So if these are 2 different questions to you, answer them differently. But who's your acting MVP in this? And then who is the closest or the most accurate kind of impression of their original SNL cast member?
I'm gonna start with Gabriel LaBelle because I already shouted it out. So we'll just fill in that. I think it would have been really, really easy to turn that into a bad Lorne Michaels impression. Listen to literally any interview with any SNL cast member, and they all eventually trot out a really bad Lorne Michaels impression that is more Dr. Evil than Lorne Michaels himself. And I think to recognize that Gabriel LaBelle did Lorne, like it's close, but there are some line deliveries where you're like, that's very close to him, but never let it become a caricature. I would say he's my favorite actor. cast member's a little trickier, and it may just be familiarity. I really liked the guy who played Chevy Chase because Chevy Chase is not a good guy, right? Like he's a jerk, and they're they lean into that, and he's a jerk in a way that is really attractive, right? That it's the kind of cocksure personality you expect him to be, and like I just thought the kind of overall impression side of the performance worked really well. But then like when Milton Berle, shuts him down, I thought he actually acted out that scene pretty well, and I enjoyed him in those moments and his vulnerability. So those would be my two picks. PT, I ut you off.
No, I think those are two really good picks. I think the Chevy Chase, who is played by Corey Michael Smith, who has been in 3 Todd Haynes movies, including last year's May December, as the son of Julianne Moore, who's trying to angle his way into being in the movie with Natalie Portman. He's the one who popped the most in the trailer. I remember that. So I was, curious if that meant he was going to be the most sort of prominent in the movie or if it was going to fizzle. And I thought it did not fizzle. I thought he popped really well. I'm going to say, since that's already been taken, in terms of acting, I'm going to go with Lamorne Morris, who plays Garrett Morris. Unrelated, apparently. I did look that up because I was like, wait a minute. But I just thought he did a really good job and had the most, I don't want to say like empathetic. Maybe I just felt the most sympathy for him as his runner, of just sort of like, what am I doing here? Like, what is my role and what is my task and how am I going to fit in? As someone who's slightly older, as the only person of color in the original cast, and just sort of wandering around and talking to people and having these different conversations. And it never got cloying. It never got like self-indulgent or self-pitying. Like it always just felt this like understandable, like anxiety and jitters, but also like kind of bemused and a little annoyed, like a great mix of emotions that I think works really well for that sort of pre-show time when you're trying to figure out what's happening there. That said, in terms of maybe not necessarily looks, but in terms of attitude, performance, voice, for me, it was Dylan O'Brien as Dan Aykroyd. Like just absolutely nailed it. Like I could have closed my eyes and believed it was Dan Aykroyd overdubbing what was happening there. I thought he did an excellent job. Antonio, what do you think?
I agree with both of those takes. I think that with Chevy Chase in particular, because I haven't read a ton about the history, but I know enough about Chevy Chase also from his like work in Community and people talking about him in the context of that show to know what to expect from him. I found him surprisingly sympathetic, and I found I enjoyed watching his scenes. I think that they did something very smart in that he's a jerk throughout the movie, but on a lot of his scenes, he's surrounded by other bigger jerks, right? Like when he's in the scene with like all the network people or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it allows us to sort of root for him in those moments. So for me, the best performance, we've already mentioned Rachel Senow. And I think that was the best performance. That was the most fully formed character. I think she's pretty essential actually to sort of anchoring the piece. She reminded me, she's just so charming and so like effortlessly funny. She reminds me of like Molly Gordon too. Like she's incredible. My favorite cast member. So earlier in an earlier episode, we talked about who our favorite cast members from the original cast were. My favorite cast member from the original cast was Jane Curtin. So Kim, I don't know how to pronounce her now. Matula. I thought that I was worried about her character in particular because she's not as easy to impersonate, I think, as like Gilda Radner or Jim Belushi. Like she doesn't have like an obvious thing for that person to do. So I was worried that she would just be sort of like the straight man compared to like the rest of them, zany, crazy, whatever. So it was really nice when she had a moment where she got to deliver a monologue with Garrett Morris to sort of indicate like, this is why I'm here. This is what I do. This is what I'm going to bring to this. And it was a nice sort of like 30 seconds. And again, a good example of the screenwriting where every character got a moment that I think really represented that actor really well. So that was my favorite in the cast. How about you, Jen?
You picked a lot of the good ones. I will say that Rachel, do we know it's Sino or is it Senate? I feel like I've heard people say Senate.
I'm not sure.
Are we confident about this? Okay.
It's Shiva Baby, I think. I from when she debuted. Yeah. No.
Okay. I think I was a little on edge until she showed up. The first scene that she's in, I was like, oh, okay. Like, I feel more comfortable in this movie because she's here. You know what I mean? Like, she's off because she plays a really important role. So I definitely agree with that. For impressions, I'm going to give a shout out to whoever is playing Billy Crystal. I have no idea who he is, but I feel like his voice was like spookily accurate. Yeah. Like, especially as a very young Billy Crystal, you know what I mean? And yeah, I'm frantically trying to look up who that was.
It's Nicholas Podany.
Yeah, who is that?
Is the name? I don't know. Does not have a Wikipedia page. I'm trying to open his IMDb. Very, very light. Was in 10 episodes of Hello Tomorrow, which was an Apple TV Plus show that we watched a couple episodes of and didn't finish. So I don't recall who he was in that. And yeah, otherwise just like very, very small, like like one episode of Blue Bloods, one episode of Law and Order. That this may be the person, when you were describing everyone, is like the most in line with that, of just like a real top.
Yeah.
Of probably a New York, like UCB comedy person who like does stuff on the stages there. And this is like part of the step into Hollywood.
Yeah, for sure. But in terms of like who I think is the MVP for acting, I mean, so here's the thing. Gabriel Abel, it took me a little bit to get used to him being in this role because he and Cooper Hoffman and a couple other key cast members, Nicholas Braun I would throw into there too. I'm like, they're all babies. Like, what is happening right now? They seem like babies dressing up in their parents' clothes. And so that was a little jarring for me at first. But then I kind of, something clicked. I don't remember when, but something clicked where I was like, oh, but at this point they probably were babies. You know what I mean? Like they were, that's kind of the point, is that the movie is trying to position them as so young and no one thought they could do anything, and kind of really leans into they were the younger generation. They were the counterculture generation. You know what I mean? Like, and so once I kind of got on board conceptually with it, then it was a lot less weird for me. And then I could kind of invest in his performance. There's one scene when kind of everything's going wrong the whole time, I guess. But there's one scene in particular where his eyes are bulging and he just looks so terrified and shell-shocked. And I was like, that's acting. Like, that's great. I really love that he's doing that. So maybe, I feel like this movie doesn't work if he doesn't work. So maybe he's my MVP.
I think that's a great choice. I do, since you've mentioned Cooper Hoffman in that description, and we're discussing sort of how they're cast young, which I think also makes sense because like people like, you want to, well, you already said it, never mind. That like you want to get that sense that they're young.
Yeah.
That I want to issue an official public apology to Cooper Hoffman's, the person Cooper Hoffman is portraying, Dick Ebersol, who I said was the executive who later fired Norm Macdonald because he was friends with O.J. Simpson. That was Don Ohlmeyer, a different NBC executive whose name begins with a vowel. And I did get confused. Dick Ebersol, the sort of dark mark on Dick Ebersol's name with Saturday Night Live is he's the one when Lorne Michaels thought he could take a year off after the first 5 years and was like, we just won't have the show for a year. And NBC was like, no, there'll still be a show. Your contract has just expired, so we're replacing you. They put Dick Ebersol in, and Lorne was mad at him for taking over. So that's not as bad as trying to defend a very likely murderer. So apologies, Dick Ebersol, and by extension, Cooper Hoffman.
All right. Did you have a favorite joke or favorite bit? Something that really, a moment that was really, you found really funny? Since we claimed this movie is actually funny.
I feel bad answering this way, but I'll say it because it's the thing that comes to mind, and I'll let other people think that it's actually not like a funny bit. It's the bit we didn't have in this one, unlike the last episode we recorded, which was the Wild Robot, which you heard earlier in our podcast feed. We talked about what were the moments made you emotional. There was a moment that got me as emotional in this movie as I got at any point during Wild Robot, and it's when Gilda Radner finds John Belushi ice skating outside of in the rink outside of Rockefeller Center, and she says something like, "Won't it be great to come back here in 20 years and remember what we were feeling this night?" And of course, 20 years after that happened, they had both already passed. And that's the sort of like it's not like overhitting it, but it is like, I could totally understand someone just being like, okay, like, we get it. Like, this is like, don't you want to feel it? But in that moment, and she didn't get, there's a lot of people to shout out. But the woman who played Ella Hunt, who played Gilda Radner, did an incredible job trying to capture that sort of particular brand of energy and performance. And so that moment and the delivery that she gives there, like, I like unexpectedly found myself like on the verge of tears.
Ella Hunt from Horizon, An American Saga Part 1? Wow, how did they get her? No, she's actually pretty good in that movie. She plays a very persnickety kind of, how'd I end up on this wagon train type, and is very fun in that movie, and it's totally different than the Gilda performance. Yeah, that was a really nice moment. I've heard critics take that scene to task because soon after that, they're like, that's Prometheus. And aren't we just like him, taking the fire from heaven? And it feels, that part doesn't work, but I think you're right that they snuck in this much better moment right with that. I will say, in partial answer to your question, Jen, there are these funny moments where the cast starts doing a sketch, which I think is a sketch from the pilot or from an early episode, and they like, everybody on the crew who had been thinking this was all stupid, like, stops and starts chuckling. And for me, I found those moments really challenging because I often wasn't laughing or didn't think they were as funny as the film was telling me they were. The exception to that might be the Andy Kaufman Mighty Mouse, which because I'm young and cool, I knew from Jim Carrey performing that bit, not from the original SNL pilot. So I do think like that one worked, but a couple of the other ones I was like, I don't think this is that funny, and I think they do Chevy's First Weekend Update Desk joke, and I'm like, it's an okay joke, but it's not there. So PT was right to shout out Lamorne Morris, who just carried New Girl a lot of the time and didn't get enough credit for his work because he's not as flashy as Mr. Schmidt. I don't remember that Max Greenfield or as adorkable as Zooey Deschanel. But when he so his plotline is really good. PT shouted that all out right, and I thought that was a really good way to put a modern spin on hey, this show has a race problem, and not like make it the focus and not make it kind of ahistorical in a problematic way. So I really liked that plot line. And the kind of apotheosis of it is when they're like, hey, sing a song. And he starts busting out, I'm going to get me a shotgun and kill all the whiteys I see. And it's like the one time where the crowd inside the show starts laughing and being like, this is incredible. And I was in the audience, like I was slapping my knee, like, yeah, let's do this. Like, yeah. And again, listeners, be assured I'm the whitest whitey you could possibly imagine. But it was really, really funny and just made me like really appreciate the performance. And I thought it achieved, in my laughter, it achieved what some of those other moments didn't, which is like, they find their way. Like, it's not perfect and it has its problems, but these performers do find a way to kind of find their space within this kind of mad, crazy show.
Just to quickly add to that, I found the cut right after that really, really funny. And I was like, oh, this movie, that's kind of one of the confirmations I had where, oh, this movie does have a sense of humor about itself, because they cut it's like a wide shot of all the old white studio executives. It's great.
I agree with Greg that a lot of the scenes a lot of scenes of people laughing at things happening didn't register for me as like particularly funny. But so instead of like the things that were sort of like told or sort of funny, I preferred. I always love scenes where just like two people out awful one another. So we mentioned the scene earlier with Milton Berle and Chevy Chase. And just the line deliveries both ways, it reminded me of like it's been a while since like Succession left the air, but Succession to me was a comedy, right? And I watched it to just hear these deliciously awful people delivering deliciously awful lines, and that exchange culminating in a surprise nude scene um, was just really funny. And so that moment stood out to me.
Had anyone else heard those stories about Milton Berle? Like, was that like a
No.
okay?
Or Johnny Carson either.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew about the Johnny Carson. Like, I don't. Something we can get into. I put this in under the rhetorical situation is about like how much they massaged the actual timeline and like condensed things down to like be in this one sequence here. But though apparently this attribute of Milton Berle was a well-known thing, and he liked to show it to people and would like, it was just sort of like, if you like see Milton Berle, like he's gonna take it out and that's gonna be a thing. And like what he might do is only take out a little bit to be like, doesn't this look like a big deal? And then if people didn't think so, he would just keep taking out more. And because and that was like, that's like, so again, there's these like moments where it's like, if I wasn't buying into it, and I think that's what you guys are saying about the like, everybody stop, watch this scene. Isn't this magic? Is a little bit like, no, like not really. Like this is fine. But I think the energy keeps you going. A similar of like anytime there's someone who's like, I think in the future I'll mostly be remembered for this, and it's just like, okay, no one thinks that. Like no one says it. But it is kind of funny when Milton Berle's like, this is the thing I'll be remembered for, because it is the thing I've heard the most about Milton Berle when people talk about him, even though he's Mr. Television. He was this pioneer. But like the stories I hear are mostly these kind of rumors of how he sort of sexually assaulted everybody, or at least like flashed people. And so like this little insidiousness of male toxicity, which I'm glad they didn't fully take away from the male cast members of the first Saturday Night Live cast, who keep slapping asses and kind of like coming on to women, and it's like never rebuffed or judged. But there's also like enough cuts to like especially Jane Curtin, but also Lorraine Newman, who are like, I don't like this, like I wish this weren't happening, which is a historical accuracy to how they talk about their time in these first couple of years.
So I'm now realizing I can't believe I didn't give this person a character a shout out earlier, but the actor who plays Michael O'Donoghue,
he's great.
He's my new favorite. I really liked him. I don't know what that says about me. That's probably questionable, but like I was like, this guy, who is this guy? And I had no idea who he was before seeing this movie. So I actually thought a lot of his scenes were the funniest. And for me, his scenes with the NBC standards police, so funny.
Yeah.
Like, because he's just so smug and like, it's great.
So I had mentioned off air that I had a great time at this movie, and there was a family of 4, so 2 college-ish aged daughters appeared in a couple, and they were sitting behind me. I didn't hear a lot of laughs. I wasn't like paying attention, but it wasn't like I heard uproarious laughter behind me. And so the scene where he says he does his rant on Jesus, right, on infanticide, and that scene ended. And I'll be honest, my reaction was like, this was okay, but I read that scene as we're supposed to think this guy is just a huge jerk, right? Like a pretentious, self-righteous asshole. Sorry, beep. And so then that
there are no
was
standards people here.
That was the moment when I hear the chairs clatter, and the family of 4 behind me got up and left and walked out. And I don't know if it was because they're religious and it was offensive to their sensibilities, or maybe they were just like, this hasn't been working. This is like the most pretentious part of this, but they walked out. And so somebody had asked on the group chat, because I threw out the bomb that some people walked out, and then I went to bed without telling you any details. So that was the moment where the family behind me left, but I think everybody else had a great time.
Also, we haven't mentioned the fact that Nicholas Braun plays not one but two characters. He's Jim Henson and Andy Kaufman. I still haven't heard any explanation as to why that is.
Oh, it's because Benny Safdie was supposed to be Andy Kaufman, and then he couldn't, like, there was a scheduling conflict, and then they basically were like, Nicholas Braun was already there, and they were like, could you do it? And he isn't that good as Andy Kaufman. Like, he's fine.
Yeah.
His Jim Henson is quite strong. And so, like, I'm not surprised that Andy Kaufman was the sort of additional, but him being so, like, out of the reality of Andy Kaufman, just his like tall lankiness carrying around that record player is a fun image to sort of keep appearing as we sort of zoom around these long takes in the different nooks and crannies of the wild production. Is just suddenly this tall man is carrying a record player wandering around looking for a bathroom. Pretty good bit.
I just realized we need a sound drop for whenever any one of us actually uses the phrase long take. Not referring to our show. To answer my own question about what I thought was the funniest, I actually think it might have been Neil, the like assistant, Gabriel LaBelle's or Lauren Michaels' assistant, and there's a scene where he like smokes something and then completely loses it. I actually thought that not that alone, but the cast members' reaction when they're trying to like talk to him about it and care for him, kind of. I thought that was very funny.
To indulge briefly in being too much of a Saturday Night Live nerd, that's the scene when the cast members go to his door. That's the scene where there's like 3 future Saturday Night Live sketches are in that like exchange. Like the things they say through the door are things that will show up in later seasons of Saturday Night Live.
Okay.
Shortgram. I knew that one. I caught that one too.
And then there's a sketch once Jimmy Carter becomes president, when Dan Aykroyd is Jimmy Carter, who is doing like a phone-in call with like, you know, the American people, and someone calls in and is just like, I took a bunch of acid and I'm losing my mind. And he's just like, all right, it sounds like you took a little bit of orange sunshine. That's going to be a real nasty high. And he like gives this whole like breakdown of like what's happening. And that's basically what Dan Aykroyd does to the guys.
Nice. All right, I think it's time to go to rhetorical situation. What do we got?
Well, the question that I had put in here, and I mean, it's really, I guess, just a topic, and it's not even really a question. But this movie is this idea of, well, we're watching in real time, or maybe a slightly expanded version of real time, the 90 minutes before the first episode starts. And critics have pointed out it's actually like 105 minutes, and even minus like the credits for the movie or whatever. But there are a lot of things that happen in the movie that I think it's probably not a surprise, even to the people who are not fully paying attention, didn't actually happen. Like, they didn't decide, oh, maybe Chevy Chase should do Weekend Update instead of Lorne Michaels. They didn't decide that 6 minutes before they went on air, because Chevy Chase could do Weekend Update to impress the affiliates, so the network wouldn't be like shutting it down. Like, that was something that happened like weeks before, even though when they were setting it up, Lorne Michaels did think, I'm going to do Weekend Update, because that's the thing he had kind of done in the comedy show he had started in Canada. So, stuff like that, hiring the guy in the bar who writes for like a quarter a joke, he writes for stand-up comedians. That is where Alan Zwiebel came from, but it wasn't like in the bar next to the studio right before it happened. So I guess it's like, to what degree is it problematic or a negative experience to watch something that sort of purports itself as, here's like the manic true story of like the build up to this thing that we all know about and created this cultural institution, blah, 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 blah. If you then go back and are just like, well, like only like 10% of this actually happened, like in the way it's presented, as opposed to being a distillation. Like, is it okay to go, ignore or massage or change and condense the facts of a sequence to get to the truth of what was happening in the relationships? Like, I don't know, was this something anyone else thought about, or were you just sort of like, stuff happened and I watched it, whatever?
I think my answer to the question is, I don't think it's a problem that they distilled all this stuff to put into the film. But I do think the one part of the film that I did not like was the constant ticking clock on the screen. And the reason was because it reminded me of like 24, right? Like episodes of 24. But it didn't work because like if the purpose was to sort of like build suspense, I was like, I know it's going to happen, right? Like I know that the episode's going to go through, and based on how much stuff is happening, I pretty quickly was like, obviously this all didn't happen exactly this way, so like this isn't true, and there's no way that it could possibly be true. So when the clock kept coming up, I kept thinking like it. I think the clock was there to make me think like, oh, we're running out of time, but it actually made me think like, oh, only that amount of time has gone by. It feels like
Right.
there's been a lot. So I feel like it didn't serve its purpose, and it wasn't necessary because there was a natural freneticism about like what was happening and how the performers were acting that I thought it actually slowed momentum to just like have a black screen and show me a clock. So that's a device that didn't work. But what you're saying is absolutely true in that like I was like, they're taking many liberties with this, but it's the frame that they chose to tell the story in, and so I understand it and I accept it. But stop shoving this clock in my face. That's my response to that. Yeah.
I think you're asking a good question, and how I would summarize what Antonio just said is like, if you feign at historicity, then you can't have it both ways. You can't take liberties and pretend it's a documentary, and I think the ticking clock is the thing that most points to that. But it is an interesting question to me in kind of deep time, because whatever we say about how this is not irresponsible and it's fine to take liberties and so on, I do think there's a way in which a film like this becomes the historical record. And I am not casting aspersions on anybody else. If I am at a cocktail party in like a month, I will be like, oh, yes, SNL is turning 50. I'll tell you about the first night. And I won't fact check any of this. I'll just kind of recite, did you know they were laying the bricks and then they all helped out right until the last second? And it's kind of cheesy, but also it'll make you weep. And like all of that is then becomes the story. And I do think that there is a way in which that is problematic outside of this movie or including this movie within it, that we then replace our stories with this. This is so dumb. Now we're in after hours, so I'll admit my own like foolishness. I was driving through Medford, Massachusetts today. Shout out Medford. Whoop, whoop. Home of Marita Menudos. Show up early for her. And I passed a sign, and it was because it was a spot where the Marquis de Lafayette had stopped on his tour after the Revolution. So he comes back to America, I think, for the 10th anniversary of the Revolution, and he stopped in Medford right on the route of Paul Revere to give a speech. And I see this sign, and I'm immediately thinking of Lafayette from Hamilton. And I don't at any moment picture an actual historical person who could have looked like the Marquis de Lafayette. I am only picturing Daveed Diggs, and I'm like, cool, that's so awesome, Lafayette was here. And I'm like, I wonder if he didn't rap right there, right? And so as I think something like Hamilton is very cool because it made all this history relevant and made us all excited about it in a different way. This is all pre-Scuttlebutt Lin-Manuel Miranda craze. All previous accomplishments wiped out when he writes the Scuttlebutt song. But it was in my mind. It was like I think of myself as a smart dude. I think of myself as a thoughtful person, and I was like, that history has just been replaced in my mind in a way that my recall can correct, but it's wrong. So I do think there's a larger question when we think about what then becomes the story. Does this really stand as Lorne Michaels is just a scrappy young freedom fighter who wants to do right by his troop of misfits? Or is that a problematic way to think about him long term? I think that's a harder question. And when we ask hard questions, we send them to Jen. Jen, what do you think?
Well, so I'm going to explain something from narrative theory that I've never quite understood, but I think is very relevant here. And that is Bakhtin's the chronotope, or time space is kind of the Greek translation, and it's a very esoteric concept, but basically it's like in fiction or art that there's, or any narrative, that there can be spaces that kind of distort time, or that time flows through a particular space, like the road or whatever, like in like old quest narratives and stuff like that. The best explanation I ever got for this, because I am coming to a point that's related to this movie, is my narrative theory professor in undergrad, shout out Nancy Armstrong, if she's still kicking, is like
the Nancy Armstrong from all the books. Yes, continue. Yeah, very well.
I mean, if you're not a literary, have not been trained in literary scholarship or critical theory, then maybe you don't know who she is. I don't know.
I mean that as I'm impressed you studied with somebody that famous. That's awesome. Okay. Continue.
According to the internet, still alive.
Okay, good. I'm glad. She was a brutal grader. What she explained, that the way she explained this concept that made it click for me is, she's like, well, shopping malls are our chronotopes. And she's like, they're specifically engineered and designed to make you feel like time doesn't exist. Because it's about navigating the space in a way that, like, it's like they're built to be circular. You're just wandering from one thing to the next, and you get casinos also like this, right? Like how they control the air and the lighting, so you never know what time of day it is, and the whole point is to keep you trapped in there. And I feel like that's kind of what this movie is doing to us, because the set is kind of like a chronotope, and in it, it's just this fever dream of whatever's happening. And like the realism of time doesn't really matter. It's all about relative time, where like these things in real life actually did happen, but they happened much farther apart, and it's very condensed. But I think the film is kind of designed, and this is why this is both what makes it interesting as an artistic project, but also limited, is that it's not going to let you breathe and pause and look around to realize what time it is. That we're just kind of supposed to be intoxicated by the manic energy and the like barreling towards this goalpost that we really know how it's going to pan out, as all of you have said, but it doesn't matter because it's about us just occupying that space without a sense of time.
This is why Jen gets the big bucks, ladies and gentlemen. What a way to take what was not very deep a question and actually make it something worthy of rhetorical situation. That's incredible, and I think that what you're saying is right, and it ties in really well with what Antonio and Greg were saying, which I had not thought of. Like I do remember sort of thinking like, countdown clock, and it was like 24, but that is actually like a problem for the movie because it's breaking that timeless reality of don't think about this too much, don't worry about it, like all this stuff's happening, it's not real, but like it's real enough, print the legend kind of thing. But then when you bring in the clock, it suddenly is time actually being like, what, I guess time does matter, like this is right. A record of it's being timestamped. So I guess that would be the sort of, if they made that change, I wonder if that feeling of even being worried about it for me would go away. Like, I don't think it was a problem, but I do think it was limiting, but I don't think that's bad. I think that's just what they were aiming to do. But I do think that but this isn't like, obviously this didn't all happen. And again, it's 100+ minutes for a 90-minute sequence of time. Like, what are we doing? Yeah. Whereas if you weren't reminding us how little time has gone by, it probably wouldn't have bothered me in the moment.
The runner up to the clock countdown is probably the bricklaying, because that's the other thing that I kept being like, how long does it actually take to build bricks? Like, it probably takes longer than this. What are they doing? Like, and they cut back to it so frequently. And I get the point is, like, they're so committed to their art and they have no sense as to like practicalities. They throw practicalities out the window. They want to create this authentic set, right? I think that's the whole point of showing the bricklaying. And then it's also the bit with like, the older guys are laughing at them, but then they get so won over at the end that they join in, right? Like, I think the brick is supposed to be a thematic thing, but because we so frequently cut back to it as kind of like a progress bar, that is, again, what made me come out of it and be like, wait a minute, like, how long has it been? That guy's still putting bricks down. He's probably not going to finish by the time they need this, right? Like, so, time, what a weird thing.
All I was going to do in response to your very smart point about time and chronotopes is that the space of this movie also works that way because we're constantly folding in on ourselves in just the way you describe. And there was a little feature going around social media today about how they really rebuilt, an accurate 8H to try to represent that. And I think they did a very good job. I mean, the show has for decades now shown you those spaces, and they all felt right. They had the llama and the Abe Lincoln, who are always there to this day. But it makes moments like the one PT shouted out before, the ice rink moment, feel incredibly fresh and inspiring just because you are someplace new and you escaped the chronotope and are experiencing that fresh air as they crash through or crash onto the ice or what have you.
And also, whenever he walks to the bar, I was like, what?
You can do that? You can just walk outside? Yeah.
I was like, what is this? All right. Are we ready for our Oscars watch? Okay. So, big question. I'm really interested to hear what everyone has to say about this. What is Saturday Night going to do at the Oscars? All right, so critics are largely out this award player at this point. How reasonable is that?
I'm always, I always think that like a showbiz story has more of a chance than you may think. And this sort of like, we're all getting together, we're putting on a show. Now, this isn't about like the transformative power of acting and how art can really change people's lives.
It's not Margot?
Well, what I was gonna say was, Jen, when you were describing your experience of watch this movie, I was like, oh yeah, this was fun, good Birdman. That is what this was. Just like constantly driving jazzy drum score with a bunch of people trying to put on a show. Anyway, I think that I think in that sense, don't count it out. I respect and understand that, like, maybe it's too thin. There's not a lot there. And there are some strong, wow, I'm looking, there's a lot of strong movies because this would count as adapted screenplay, wouldn't it?
It has to, right?
Because it's based on reality. I think it's partly based on it's not listed as adapted from anything.
If Barbie ended up and adapted, how could this not? I don't know.
Well, that's based on, the problem is the IP of it all. And I don't know if like there was a thing in history counts as IP. So, okay, right. I was looking at the wrong list. This is still, I don't want to, act like the variety predictions from Clayton Davis, which can sometimes be off the wall. It does still have this listed in the 4 slot after Honora the Brutalist, Seed of the Sacred Fig, before September 5th. And we have a Real Pain, Blitz, Hard Truths, His 3 Daughters, and DD in the space afterwards. Like, I could see any of those 5 coming up and overtaking Saturday Night, but I also would be a little surprised if they don't want to like be like, what about that movie? It was fun. It was about showbiz. I know those guys, or I remember that. Like, I watched that first night, or I didn't, but I tell everyone I did because that seems cooler. And then is it that far of a leap to be like, well, what about the costumes? What about the production design? What about maybe it slides in the 10th spot of Best Picture? I feel like there's a path for that to sort of gain some momentum. But I think by no means is it a lock for anything.
I'd add score. John Batiste did the score, so I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that the editing, it reminded me of Birdman in a I don't know if a good way, I guess. But I didn't like Birdman, but like but
we know
similar editing. Just in case listeners don't forget, they forgot. So editing, I think it's too lightweight because editing is a precursor to like a front runner for Best Picture, and I don't think that it can take that. But there was a lot of editing that happened here and it was sort of impressive the way that everything was stitched together. So I would say everything that PT said. Again, sort of like a distant possibility, but a possibility. But I'd add score to that.
I was going to also add score, and don't forget that Jean-Baptiste is in this. He appears as playing a different musician. And he was nominated as just for Best Song last year. I know his documentary was not nominated, right?
But the song from it was.
But the song was.
I two things I want to note to add to that. He's playing Billy Preston, who is the fifth Beatle, the guy who showed up for the Let It Be sessions. If you watch Peter Jackson's Get Back, if you want to watch 9 hours of the Beatles hanging out and recording and fighting, and they stop fighting because someone else shows up, that's the person that John Batiste is playing. And also, apparently, they recorded the score live while they filmed. Like that band, like he wrote it while these things, like they just improvised it while they were unfolding. So I do think that story, which is one of those things that's being passed around along with the set building and along with some of the structural things, I think if that catches hold, like I could see this getting score first before anything else. So
it is at number 6. It's at number 6 on Gold Derby, behind The Wild Robot, which I said could get in here. So yeah. Dune Part 2 is number 2. It's egregious.
Because it should be higher or lower?
Because it should be, I don't know.
Okay, I want to make sure. What's number 1?
Higher. Conclave.
Ooh.
Which I've heard nothing but bad things about that score.
Popes. That's the main theme. Popes,
it's just
Cardinals. They are
dubstep.
Only one pope and he's dead. Like that's the chorus. Back and forth.
Nice.
Look, I wasn't gonna tease you last episode about our Vulture movie check-in. I am starting to feel like Dune 2 was a really long time ago, and I think it's got real weakness to some of these crowd pleasers. And to that point, the score of this, I just want to also shout out, I think the music from the trailer was in the movie. It was directly taken. I have been humming that a lot all fall. Like I'll see the trailer, then go see a movie, and then be humming the score from the trailer on my way home. So, or clicking my teeth to it or some such. It's not really like a hum, but you know. Yeah. Anybody want to make a case for one of the performances? It seems like a long road to me.
No, because it's too much of an ensemble. I think it could be really fun if this got SAG ensemble.
Yeah.
But I don't know how the crediting has worked, because I know sometimes that's complicated. They have in order to be included in a movie's ensemble for SAG, you have to be listed like so far into the credits or so. You know,
you have to have your own screen like on the credits.
Right. You can't share an individual with other people's names. So I don't remember.
Interesting.
Which they all did.
I feel like a bunch of them had a
That's true. The end credits, it depends if they count the end or the opening. That's a great question. I think it would have to be Gabriel LaBelle in lead or Rachel Sennott in. I think that would be supporting, but I don't know. I feel like those categories have too much going on for either of them to sneak in.
Yeah. For
a quote-unquote weak year, there's suddenly a lot of crowding. Cut to J.K. Simmons nominated for Best Supporting Actor again.
The Academy loves him, so I wouldn't put it past them.
I do.
The dance number, which we haven't mentioned, is very charming. Like, if that was your Oscar role, it would totally win over.
Like, get J.K. Simmons to perform that. That scene is so ridiculous. Gold, since I'm on here anyway, my other Gold Derby note is it's actually number 5 in original screenplay. It's Anora, The Brutalist, Real Pain, Blitz, and then Saturday Night.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So
I feel like that would be a decent bet if we got to the very sad point of gambling on actual nominations this far out. I think that would be a pretty good one there, even though it's not a lock like Anora is or The Brutalist is, as even if it falls back, those movies are going to get a screenplay nomination. Whereas this movie could fade away and kind of get lost, and suddenly it's not nominated at all. But I could see it.
All right, listeners, if you are a regular listener of our show, you might think that we are wrapping up now, but you would be wrong, because PT has prepared a very fun SNL Cast Draft for us. PT, take it away.
Oh my God. What a thing for us to do at the end of a long recording. So we thought we could take advantage of our experience with this movie, talking about the first night of Saturday Night Live, to have some fun with our own personal histories and preferences with this cultural institution that is Saturday Night Live. And what better kind of fun that we can have and we like to have than to be a little competitive and do a draft. So the goal here is for each of us to build our own fantasy cast of not ready for primetime players from across the history of the show. So in the interest of time, and saying that may be very prophetic. We don't know how long this will take. We'll be building a core of 6 repertory players based on categories that we've all sort of agreed to and looked into. So the standard drafting rules apply. We will randomly generate an order for drafting, then go in a snake fashion to fill out the rosters for our fantasy cast. So whoever picks first in the first round will pick last in the second round, and whoever picks last in the first round, it'll snake back and forth. The eligible pool of people is anyone who we were using the Wikipedia list of who was in the cast, and they are eligible. We're going from there. Once someone is drafted in any given category, they cannot be drafted somewhere else, even if you could make the case they qualify in different places. I think that part of the fun is to try to build sort of a holistic cast across these categories that will allow us to sort of say, like, yeah, this person is in this category, but they also are going to be able to help and do the show in these other ways. So the categories that we have chosen are breakout star, which is sort of a cast member who becomes the clear focus of attention, exhibited through sketch dominance and or their successful future Hollywood career. Now that we know, looking back, character developer, someone who builds up a roster of recurring characters that you almost maybe get sick of seeing, but like they're very popular, they're very successful. So someone who can do that. An impressionist who can do imitations of real people. That's always useful and helpful on the show. A weekend update anchor, a cast member who can run the regular desk sketch. And we have a limitation here of they have to have had some experience with that role in reality for someone to be drafted in that category. So there's sort of a little subsection there. The 5th category is the glue, which is the cast member who can hold any sketch together, whether it be leading it or kind of fading into the background, being like the dad in a sketch where something happens, or like the customer in a crazy store, someone who's just there to kind of keep it all in tight and keep it together. And finally, in true big picture draft fashion, we have a wild card, which is anyone else associated with the show. They do not have to be tied to that cast list. Anyone who you see has, whether they were a frequent guest host, they were a writer, they provided, they did short films for a while. Anyone that you think associated with the show that you want to put into your cast. So it's up to each individual drafter, showrunner, how much they want to base their choices on sort of the reality of the accumulated SNL experiences a cast member has versus the potential you believe they showed on the show or in other fields. For instance, in reality, Laurie Metcalf did not establish much of a record in the one episode in 1981 where she appeared as a feature player during a single filmed update segment. But maybe you think it's Laurie Metcalf, like Ladybird Hive, Rise Up. She would be killer. What if she was one of my cornerstone people for a 5-year run on the show? That would be great. Part of the discussion will be why certain choices were made, but ultimately the defense of your pick is between you, your God, and the rest of your cast. So that's sort of the setup. I have, we can keep track of stuff here. I have a randomizer. Are there any questions from my fellow drafters, my fellow long take reviewers, before we get started?
Ready to go.
Okay. All right. I'm going to hit the randomizer so we can find out our draft order. Of course, as I worryingly predicted, I have the number 1 pick. I come first. Number 2 is Antonio. Number 3 is Greg. And number 4 is Jen.
Oh, perfect.
So Jen had said she wanted to go last, which is good. And I had said, off mic, I don't want to go first. And yet here I am. That said, I was prepared for this eventuality. And I have the person that I have to take here. And I'll say it's because of this. I did come up with the categories. I had an idea for who would be the top person in each of them. There's only one category who is named after someone. whose name is based on a nickname, and that's why I'm taking Phil Hartman in The Glue. He's the glue guy. His nickname was The Glue on the show. He could do anything, and I feel really great having Phil Hartman be the first draft pick in a Saturday Night Live cast draft. So,
that's an excellent pick. That's an excellent pick.
Antonio, over to you.
I'm going to take, so this was the top of my draft board. It's going to be a character developer. I think that it's important in the show that you have that because they're going to be in a bunch of sketches. And for me, this is Bill Hader. So Bill Hader is my character developer. Bill Hader, I guess his most famous character is Stefan. Excellent. But he had many recurring characters throughout the show. I'm thrilled to have Bill Hader. Throw it over to Greg.
All right, I'm mad at both of you now, and Hader's off the board. I had him under impressionist, so I find that very interesting because I do think he's got very strong skills in both.
Yes,
he will always, for me, be the guy from Dateline going, yes. I just hear that all the time when he does that. All right, so I had thought I was going to lose this person, so I had two categories where I needed to get my number one. One was Phil Hartman, and PT already stole him. So I am not letting another soul, namely Jen, go before I claim my weekend update anchor.
Oh, no.
No, it's Norm Macdonald, because that's the only choice in that category.
I love it. That's like, there's only one choice. Jen's like, oh, great. That's not who I want.
Norm is so good at Weekend Update, they fired him over it. And PT already mentioned the controversy before, but there's nobody better. And he embodies the spirit of this is true counterculture. This is the inmates are running the asylum and we're going to just do what we think is best for the show. And hey, spoiler alert, it's absolutely the funniest update ever has been, probably ever will be. It's just incredible. So Jen, good luck picking up the pieces of your draft board now as you take two picks.
Oh no. I forgot that I had to do two. Well, let's do one first and then I'll worry about the second in a second. So I was also going to go Weekend Update, but I'm going to go with the most iconic person that I associate with Weekend Update, and that is Tina Fey.
Boo, boo, Norm's better. Boo, grow up, you child. Boo.
Another thing. Why are you a child?
But I don't know. Do I need to explain this pick? I don't know.
No, it's an incredible choice. It's the.
Okay. I don't think you have to.
I actually had Tina Fey ranked. I had Tina Fey ranked over Norm, as well.
I did too.
Even though, but I also sort of thought of it as like you guys are more 90s, even more 90s kids than me. So like you guys are love Norm. You'll fight over Norm. Maybe I can sneak Tina Fey in, but silly me.
I mean, 30 Rock probably does have a lot to do with this pick, to be honest.
She was also head writer for like 5 seasons. So again,
absolutely.
It's outside the scope of like what we're doing, but we're thinking holistically, like she's just banging out sketch after sketch and writing. No, I mean, I get it. It's great.
She's going to be the only person who could possibly take over for Lorne when Lorne retires.
Correct.
Right? Like it's got to be her, and very well deserved. I look forward.
Maybe Seth Meyers, but it should be Tina Fey.
So I still have to pick somebody else.
Yep.
Back to the Wikipedia list. Let's see. I warned you all that I would be bad at this.
That's okay. You're the one who has to edit it, so it's fine.
So I think let's see, I know who I want to pick next, but I just don't know which category they would go in, probably.
We can help with the category. You can tell us the person.
Yes.
So I want to pick Kristen Wiig.
Oh.
I would say breakout star.
Breakout star or characters.
I was thinking character developer, but I couldn't think of any characters.
She was the person on Saturday Night Live for like half of her time there. So she certainly qualifies for breakout star. But she also was like just ton of characters. So there's a bunch of people who overlap this way. So really, either one, I would say if you think in your mind, well, I know a couple other people I'd want for one of those categories, put her in the other one.
Okay. I'll put her in character developer then.
Okay.
Because I feel like when I picture her in skits as characters.
Okay. Great.
I very recently had a Stop and Shop clerk full-on Target lady me. what is this? Where did you find this? And I told her what aisle, and she was clearly going to run there as soon as I was done. So it's a great pick. Wig was very high on my list. I will always remember when they had, I believe, Mick Jagger sing her off the show, and it was like absolutely defined breakout and does incredible characters. I wish Hollywood could give her a little more to do lately. I feel like she's in a funny moment. But she's kind of amazing in Will and Harper. If you haven't watched Will and Harper yet, she has a very...
Jasmine speaks highly of, I think it's an Apple TV Plus show she did recently, named after some Florida town, like Palm Beach or something like that. Which
Palm Royale.
Thank you, Palm Royale. I don't know if everyone liked it, but Jasmine thought it was quite good, and she was really good in it.
Yeah. So good pick, Jen. Bully for you. I will say, since I'm a little worried about my breakout, because I was going to take Wig for breakout, I've got two here, and I'm already getting worried that people are going to call out my cast for being too dude heavy, but there's a lot of picks left to go. For me, there's one person who is my exact time when I fell in love with SNL. I did pick Norm, but I'm actually more of the Colin Quinn Weekend Update era, just to date myself a little more specifically, is when I really started staying up. Norm had just been fired. My friends wanted to check it out. So that specific moment, there's one dude who, and I just name checked him. It's Will Ferrell. I got to take Will Ferrell for breakout star. I mean, nobody has been more iconic. They could do 6 volumes of best of Will Ferrell, and nobody, I would say, has probably had a better post SNL career. Certainly in terms of box office, but generally speaking, in terms of, he also seems like one of those guys, when you hear people in Hollywood tell stories, they're like, he's the nicest man in the world. I thought Will and Harper is a little constructed in that fashion, but he comes across as just like a good guy trying to do right by the people in his life. And I'm vamping to give Antonio time to think. That's it. Will Ferrell. Thank you very much.
I will just note, he also, for 3 of us here connected to USC, he just shows up at USC events all the time. He goes to the football games. When I went to an LAFC game, he just was like there with like the employees who carry out the flags. He was just one of the people doing it, and they didn't like announce him or anything. They just panned over all the employees, and he was one of them. And it's great. Like, yeah, he just seems like a very fun guy that everyone likes to have around.
I don't know if we'll get to a Will and Harper episode because we got behind on recording, but it is well worth a watch. Anybody who hasn't checked out Will and Harper.
All right, it's my turn. I'm gonna do my wild card now. So I'm gonna pick someone who is a writer, but also recently a frequent host, and it goes with Bill Hader. It's John Mulaney. John Mulaney is my wild card. He finishes. He's the writer of Stefan. He invented Stefan. I was most nervous about getting these two in particular. So whatever happens next, I'm pretty confident that I'll be able to fill out with really great people. But with Bill Hader and John Mulaney anchoring my cast, I'm feeling pretty good. So PT.
This is, early wild card, but what a great choice. Excellent. Excellent move there. And yeah, again, like clearly has the goods now to be in the cast in addition to writing. So yeah, this is great.
I'm picturing John Mulaney and Bill Hader giving the Oscar to Boyhood, and Antonio just dying right there in the
room. Yes. Now here's the thing: is it's come back around to me, and I don't want to turn into a Mallory Rubin of this draft, but somehow my top people in all but one category are still available. So that's wild on my rankings. So I have to figure out
passive aggressive
what to do. Well, again, this is why, again, it's real Mallory Rubin. I want to thank you all for gifting me with this opportunity of I have to try to choose between 3 of my top ranked people.
That's because we all don't remember the late 70s the way you do, because you were out buying booze for teenagers, right, and we were not yet born.
Well, I was just talking to all the other people in the gas lines about what happened on Saturday Night Live the night before. Okay, so I'm going to go with. Well, I totally understand, Greg, what you were saying about like Will Ferrell, and again, that does make sense. He was high up on my list as a clear example, but he's not the example of the breakout star. So I'm taking Eddie Murphy in breakout star. Like he's the guy, and he's the show was just him basically for 4 years. Like everyone else was kind of there and doing stuff. Jim Belushi and Peter Ackroyd could just be in their brother's shoes and hanging out on the periphery because Eddie Murphy was there doing whatever it was he wanted to do. So I'm taking Eddie Murphy for 2, and I am going to stay in the distant past, which again technically I don't remember, but I want to be able to mix this person in with everyone else across all the eras, and just to keep my like sad Gone Too Soon drive with Phil Hartman. In character developer, I'm taking Gilda Radner, who just like churned out characters left and right, had a ton of different things, and weekend update spots and also the sketches. She was incredible, and just what a comedic voice, and just what a classic presence on the show. So those are my 2 picks. Heading into the 3rd round, I'm taking Eddie Murphy and then Gilda Radner. Back to you, Antonio.
I'm going to take my weekend update anchor now. This person I actually think of, I'm taking because she was an excellent weekend update anchor, but also was excellent in sketches. So she has dual appeal here. Amy Poehler, Tina Fey's co-anchor. So Amy Poehler, my pick. Greg, what about you?
I gotta tell you, Antonio, I wrote another name in before you were done talking because I thought I knew who you were
Jane
saying.
Curtin. Yeah, Jane Curtin. It was between Jane Curtin and Amy Poehler, but I decided Amy Poehler. Yeah,
Amy Poehler's got a stronger sketch record, so I think that's very fair. That's very fair. And yeah, I mean, I think the 3 of you all have weekend update anchors who have legacies in the sketches as well. So I think that's a great call. Greg?
I was 100% about to take Amy Poehler in character. And I was remember she had the character who I think was just a stepdaughter and just would go Rick. And like that,
she'd
it's like
around.
Yeah. And it's like, there's no character to there, but it was incredible and iconic the second. Yeah. So, and also another incredible post run, obviously with Parks and Rec, and then, her producing role and things like that. So I'm pretty bummed. And if I do end up with the all male Saturday night show, no, I'm going to act proactively to prevent that. And I'm going to go for the glue. And so I will say my definition of glue was that, and I think this largely matches PT, but like when a sketch is going off the rails and it's just really falling apart, you need that person who can just like stop Jimmy Fallon from laughing, for example. I don't think this person was with Jimmy Fallon. And I also just was thinking of who seems like a presence that would bring people together. So for my glue, I'm going to grab Maya Rudolph, because I think she's a really underrated comedy presence. It's a little funny because she's back on the show right now because they needed Kamala, and there you go. She gets a job for I don't know, however long they need her, hopefully years and years. But I also just think I feel like Kristen Wiig kind of eclipsed her because they were in a similar moment and filled a kind of similar lane in the cast. But the way Maya can sing and the way Maya, always brings just that goofy energy in just the right way, I think she fits as a glue and would like get all these big male egos to like chill out in my cast room. So Jen, over to you.
Well, you took my pick, so I'm going to need a second to regroup.
I'll just say I had Maya Rudolph, one of my top ranked people in Impressionist, because I think she does great impressions. But I think there's a real that case is strong that she also is a glue gal.
Yeah, I was torn between those 2 categories for her, but I knew I wanted to kind of pick her next. So
incredible on The Good Place too. That's like my favorite Maya Rudolph role of all time.
I think who I'm gonna go with next, and it's more figuring out the category. I think I'm gonna go with Kate McKinnon in.
You could go breakout star.
I was thinking breakout.
She does impressions too. She did do a bunch of impressions.
Oh, that's true.
She was Hillary. Yeah.
I'll go with her impressions. Weird Barbie herself.
Excellent. No, I think that's great.
I'm embarrassed she wasn't on my list. Didn't occur to me, but absolutely an iconic performer. Another person who should be doing more. She was great in the Lady Ghostbusters, right? Like that was,
I think she's also the only SNL cast member to win an Emmy for performing. I think that's right. And she won, I think, a couple of times for Best Supporting Actress. But yeah, she dominated the show in the same way that Kristen Wiig did after Kristen Wiig left. So who's next?
No, it's
me.
No,
you again.
Time.
Yeah.
Oh, right, because I'm on the end.
We have to warn Jen when we're providing filler for her because it's like, oh,
because I have no. I'm actually
by filling all this space and she doesn't know to be thinking.
Right, because I'm listening to you and I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. And then I'm supposed to be picking my next turn. I do feel like I've been staying pretty recent, so I should pick somebody who's a little bit more old school. In honor of this movie, and this is me smuggling in more commentary on Saturday night, I gotta go with John Belushi. Because I think in
Breakout Star.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Which thankfully I didn't do on my last with my other pick. So I feel like the tone of Saturday night, you can feel the shift in how, and I can't pinpoint how or why necessarily, but there's a feeling that shifts when they show John Belushi. And I feel like maybe part of it feels almost like a haunting quality, like because he died so tragically young, but the movie also goes to great lengths to show us that he was kind of the genius talent that no one understood or no one knew what to do with, except for maybe the Rosie character. She's a really good handler of John of John Belushi. So yeah, and Blues Brothers.
To speak to how much of a breakout star John Belushi was, there's 1 week in 1978 when he had the number one late night TV show, the number one movie in Animal House, and the number one record on the album charts for the first Blues Brothers recording. So wild. And co-star of the first movie based on a Saturday Night Live character in the Blues Brothers. Huge. Great pick for the halfway mark of our draft. Greg, it's back to you.
That is very interesting. It reminds me, I was so excited for Donald Glover when he starred in Solo, had This Is America, and guest hosted SNL. So I wonder if he actually managed that week to come close to that. And how many people have almost done that weird kind of EGOT over the years would be an interesting project. So just to recap, I still have character, impression, and wild card. And there's a deep bench. I don't know, 50 years. It turns out there's a lot of people, and I think we can all find satisfying picks. And I was bouncing back and forth because I want to fill in character, and I want to get another female performer on my roster. And I was stuck between two from the same era that would fit really well here. And the one I did not choose was Anna Gasteyer. And I want to say Anna Gasteyer, she doesn't get enough credit, in my opinion.
Does not. Agreed.
And I think is way awesomer than people remember her, and is often could be a good glue pick because kind of supports people, and is often in the skits that are on other people's best of DVDs, right? Now I'm dating myself that I used to buy those DVDs.
If we were doing this right and we went like 10 or 11 cast members deep, Anna Gasteyer would be drafted. If by no one else.
Well, and
she's on my list.
Yeah. So I will say that probably tips my hand for who I am picking, and it was very close. I'm going Molly Shannon for my character.
Oh yeah, she's incredible.
Which it's just because it's character, I just have to lean a little more to Molly Shannon with Mary Catherine Gallagher, with I don't even remember the lady who just kicks her leg, and that's her whole character. Yep. Like, I love it. Whatever that character
54
was.
50,
yeah.
50.
I'm 50.
50.
I'm
and
50.
And because I picked Will Ferrell earlier, one of my favorite things in my early SNL days would be when you somehow stayed up through update and you got to like 12:45 and there'd be like one last sketch. The one that stands out to me is it was called Dog Show, and it was just Molly Shannon and Will, and they banged a drum and said Dog Show, and like that was it, and it really wasn't funny. and I heard them explain one time, like, there's funny ha ha and there's funny weird, and then there's just weird, and they would aim for just weird and see if they could make it funny weird. And so I think since I have Farrell, I also would love to see, I know there were a couple shows where they got a lot of the female cast to come back. I think it was when Betty White hosted was one of them. I'd love to see Molly Shannon and Maya Rudolph together, because I actually think that would be super fun energy and they could have a good time.
Molly Shannon doing a great supporting role on this season's Only Murders in the Building for people who are watching it. She's in that and she's doing great.
She's had a few good drama roles too in recent times. So.
Year of the Dog was incredible. That was a starring role for her. That was an incredible movie, incredible performance.
Definitely thought you meant Power of the Dog and was confused, but yes.
Molly Shannon, great pick. Greg, Antonio, back to you.
All right. So with my fourth pick, I'm going to pick my breakout star. I've been picking fairly recent people, so I'm going to go back a bit and pick one of my favorite actors, Bill Murray. So Bill Murray, my breakout star. I don't think that he requires any explanation.
No, excellent.
All right.
Excellent pick. It's crazy that Chevy Chase leaves and they're like, well, we got to find one other person, and they get someone who ends up bigger and better than he could ever be. So that is an excellent choice. And really, I'm just really thankful, you guys, that you continue to leave me the people I want. So this is awesome. I'm going to take in this round an impressionist. We were sort of discussing off mic what's the first cast, and the defining person of my first cast was Dana Carvey. And his sort of roster of impressions. There's some big debates about like whether he actually is quote unquote good at impressions, but what he does is he gets the sort of essence of someone and latches onto it. And that's great. I like that. I kind of prefer that to just like straight mimicry that is talented, very talented and worthwhile and good. But you know, I grew up on Dana Carvey, so I love Dana Carvey's impressions. And then in the turn, I'm going to go with somehow this is like, and this is more about my ranking, I guess. Somehow my top weekend update anchor is still on the board. And it's probably because people don't really think of him as a weekend update anchor. I had Bill Murray on my board because he did do weekend update for a couple of years. But I'm going to go before then. And I'm going with Dan Aykroyd, who was the co-host with Jane Curtin. And, honestly, like my secret strategy for the draft is what I really wanted was oops, all glue guys. Like I just wanted people who could be considered the glue. And Dan Aykroyd is up there as maybe like the early stage, like writing in behind the scenes, doing characters, being the background person, being the dad, and also running weekend update. And so it might be weird to have him do it without Jane Curtin as a partner, but I think he would do an excellent job. He's got the voice, and I think it would be great to have Dan Aykroyd on my cast for weekend update. Antonio, it's back to you.
To me, for my impressionist, I'm going to go with one I know one of Greg's favorites, Anna Gasteyer. One of my favorites, and yours too, PT. So for impressions, I just had to quickly look up her impressions. I knew she did some on the show. She did so many characters. I remember her Martha Stewart very fondly. She also did Celine Dion because she had an incredible voice. She reminds me of Maya Rudolph. Like she just this multiple talent threat. And she always elevated every sketch she was in. So Anna Gasteyer for my impressionist. Greg.
Impressionist is getting very thin on my list, and it's hard because everybody did a couple here and there when they looked like somebody. So I feel like you could do a little category fraud, but honoring the category in the spirit it is, I think the best choice left for me is Daryl Hammond. And this is definitely like a longevity award that he, I believe has played Clinton and Trump on the show. I'm not positive. I think he played Trump sometime in, before they kind of gave it to Alec Baldwin. And I believe is still the announcer on the show, right? So he kind of had his time in the cast, left, and then is still in the orbit of the show and shows up every once in a great while. The impression that I will always remember is his Regis, which is a really fun one to listen to. And I think for a long stretch, they were doing some sketches built around basically that. And he's got a real talent for it. Did I have Hader and Carvey above this? Of course I did, but this is the best of what remains for Impressionist, in my opinion. Other than Adam Sandler, who just does the same voice for whoever.
I will note the reason that Daryl Hammond is the announcer is because he's such a good impressionist. He would fill in for Don Pardo when Don Pardo was sick as Don Pardo and no one knew. Like he would do his impression of Don Pardo, and then Don Pardo died, and they were like, "Why don't you just do it in your regular voice?" And now that's what he does.
Nice, Jen.
I have Glue and
Wild Card.
So I'm gonna make a pick that I don't think is gonna I'm losing the draft with this pick probably, but I keep coming back to it, and so maybe I'll just do it anyway for good podcasting. For my Glue, I'm gonna go with Kenan Thompson.
Yeah, that's good.
Great
because he has been in the most seasons of SNL. He's been in 22 seasons, which I didn't really know until looking stuff up for this draft. And to go back to Greg was saying kid of the 90s, his Nickelodeon show.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's all that. That was baby SNL for me. When I was a kid, I remember because there was a short period of time when we accidentally stole cable from our neighbors, and I used to watch that show all the time, and then then it went away. So fond memories, and I feel like he's a really good candidate for Glue because he's just always there, and he's always doing good work, and he's just a steady presence on the show. So then that leaves my final pick.
Yeah, which is Wild Card, which could be anyone, any cast member to fit any role, or someone who is a guest host a lot, someone who's a writer like John Mulaney. That was for Antonio's pick. So
I'm kind of torn about this actually, because there's a bunch of people who weren't really on the show that much, or actually I have no memory of them being on the show that much, but I really like them. So Jason Sudeikis, but I know him much more from Ted Lasso. I was like, oh, Jason Sudeikis was on SNL. So maybe I shouldn't pick him.
I had him under Breakout Star because I thought he was so prominent, but apparently he didn't really crack the public consciousness.
It might have just been the period that I didn't watch SNL. You know what I mean? Because I think SNL for me definitely went in fits and spurts. There were periods where I would watch it, then I would just forget about it for years and then come back and be like, oh, right, this is funny. But same thing with Julia Louis-Dreyfus, love her. She's an icon, but I could not tell you a single thing she did on SNL. So now I'm kind of so I think she's out. So I think that seems like a disingenuous route to just pick a big name that I really like.
I would say I don't think so. I think you can draft them based on the investment of what they could do, even if they were not allowed to show it. Because that was part of the Eddie Murphy, end of the Eddie Murphy years, and the transition back to Lorne was when Julia Louis-Dreyfus was on. She wasn't given anything to do. And that's there's a bunch of people like that. Sarah Silverman was on for a year, but she wasn't given anything to do.
Right.
Jenny Slate was on for a year, wasn't given anything to do. That people that you were well, I know they can do awesome stuff. So I don't think that's a problem to invest in someone like that if you want to.
Well, but then I feel to play this game well, I have to know what you were going to pick, and I have not been doing that. Which maybe at my last pick is not the time to reveal this. But
it's your cast, Jen. It's what's in your heart.
I know. Well, let me think about who I have so far. Yes, who do I have so far?
You have John Belushi in Breakout Star. You have Kristen Wiig in Character Development. You have Kate McKinnon, an impressionist, Tina Fey, Weekend Update anchor, Kenan Thompson as the glue. It's a great cast.
That's pretty good.
That's really good.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and now I'm going to mess it up with this last one. What?
When I tuned in and saw Kenan is not just 22 years, but still on the show, I was like, what? Like he left and did a sitcom and came back? Like, I don't think anybody's ever.
He didn't leave.
That.
He didn't leave.
He was
on.
He
just kept doing it.
Wow.
I remember when Tim Meadows hit 10 years and everyone was like, why won't this guy go? And it's crazy that he's lapped him and done it another 10 years and is still going. Anyway, sorry, Jen. We're buying you time.
You know what? I'm going to take a hard turn away from whatever I was just saying.
I love it.
I'm gonna pick Fred Armisen.
Great choice.
Because I really like Portlandia, and that probably would not have been possible had he not been on SNL. So he's my wild card.
I do appreciate how much you picked your Saturday Night Live cast based on the things that are not related to Saturday Night Live.
I know. You were warned.
It's true. I will just say one thing about being in LA and going out to things is you never know when Fred Armisen will show up. He'll show up to basically any comedy show. Jasmine and I went to see a rock band play, and he came out and played percussion with them for 7 songs and just left.
Whoa.
And it was like, oh, okay. So
That's
Fred
delightful.
Armisen's everywhere, and he's always ready to perform for you.
Even better.
I really debated him for my impressionist, but I think his character work is stronger than impression. So I think, again, you could sneak him into impression. He does some really good impressions, but it didn't feel like his primary role, or maybe more accurately, what I enjoy him in. I'm left with wild card, and I have a list of kind of weird choices that I would almost go. I was going to make a strong case for Cecily Strong, who I think in the latter stages of SNL in the later years was totally underappreciated. And girl you wish you hadn't talked to at a party. Is that the character on Update? It was so brilliantly done and well observed. It was really great. I am vamping for my wild card. I also thought about Smigel because I think he's had a great run between Conan and this show and TV Funhouse. I think Jim Downey should get a name check just as like the person besides Lorne Michaels, who I'm probably spoiling all that you're about to say, but these are people who are on my wild card list. But when you look at what's available, there's really only one choice in my mind. I'm going to take all time, probably the best host the show has ever had, the most frequent, I believe still, but maybe not. It's got to be Steve Martin, right? Like I got to grab Steve Martin to close it out. He will guest host every week. As Jen said, she didn't really have some old people. My cast is missing a little of that gravitas of an elder statesman. And so, the Steve Martin documentary that came out last year kind of reminded me like, oh, right, he's insanely funny and has been insanely funny in public for 70 years, 60 years. It's just incredible. And so it's always shocking. I think he's one of the only guest hosts to ever get his own best of DVD, right? Because he guest hosted so often. So I'm taking Steve Martin.
Guest hosted so much, people assumed he was a cast member, but he never was.
Yeah.
I think it's a great choice. Antonio, your final pick.
All right. My final pick, Glue. I had a lot of candidates for this. Cecily Strong was actually one of my Glue candidates, although I think she was more of to me, she was like an excellent character actor. I'm just going to say these other people who I love. Vanessa Bayer, I thought was a great Glue person. Jan Hooks was a great Glue person. Tim Meadows, great Glue person. Chris Parnell, a great Glue person. But the one that I'm choosing, I want to even out the gender. And also she was hilarious during her run. A.D. Bryant is going to be my Glue person, and we'll finish out my roster. I'm really pleased with these 6 players. PT, finish us off.
Okay, all right. Wow, that's a great pick. I like that. So I have Glue. My Glue list is all over the place. And I'm thinking, I'm trying to balance my cast. I did have Steve Martin as my top Glue pick. I'm going to vamp by talking through some of the things I was thinking of. Also, outside of sort of traditional cast members, I was thinking about taking Albert Brooks, who just made short films for the first couple of seasons, and like, what if Albert Brooks was a cast member? Like, that would be incredible. But I've got too many like original cast people. That would be too much. I also had Robert Smigel. In terms of long frequent hosts, I had John Goodman, Tom Hanks, Christopher Walken. I believe Christopher Walken also had a best of DVD because there was so many of those, so many sketches of his that were famous. Once he hit more cowbell, they put that DVD out right away. Also, like, there's Larry David, who famously was only wrote in the show for like part of a season, and the episode of Seinfeld where George quits his job in a big huff and then decides he didn't want to do that and then just goes back on Monday and acts like he never quit is based on Larry David quitting Saturday Night Live during the show and then going back to the writer's room Monday night and acting like that didn't happen and being able to stay on for the rest of the year. But that said, this isn't going to do... Oh, and I also had what I thought was going to be my pick. It's not going to be my pick because I need to address my gender imbalance. Just for my own sanity. But my pick for a more recent person was going to be Tim Robinson, who was very underappreciated when he was on the show. But I Think You Should Leave is just a tremendous sketch comedy. So what if he came back? But I'm going to go with someone that was mentioned before because I do want to have a little gender balance. I'm taking Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who didn't have a lot to do during the... well, Jen, when you were talking about it, I thought I'd be able to get Steve Martin because I didn't think anyone else was like at that level of intelligence to choose it. But Greg proved me wrong. So yeah, I'm taking Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Didn't get to prove what she could do, but we've seen Seinfeld. We've seen New Adventures of Old Christine. We've seen Veep. We all know that she can absolutely kill it and would be an incredible cast member. At the time in the mid 80s, she could have done it. And especially now, like if I could get her now on Saturday Night Live with all the experience she has and all of her chops, that would be incredible. That's the last pick. Ms. Irrelevant of our Saturday Night Live cast draft. What a great time. What a great job. Is there anyone else that people want to shout out who haven't been mentioned? We've mentioned a lot of people. Is there anyone else that anyone wants to mention before we review our lists?
So I'll just say that I did consider Steve Martin. And I don't really know why I didn't end up picking him. I think I'm going to be honest. But the big one that I kind of regret now is Billy Crystal. And he wasn't actually on for that long. It looks like, but City Slickers was a very formative movie for young Jen. I have watched that movie so many times.
I mean,
and obviously like bigger movies like When Harry Met Sally and you know stuff like that. But I think for me, because City Slickers was like that was 91, so his stint on SNL would have been before that. It looks like.
So
right?
Yeah, just so you know, and little background. I'll try to not do this too much. I apologize. We're gone very long and it's very late. But after Eddie Murphy left, the cast, like Eddie Murphy left in the middle of a season, and like that show really kind of just sputtered to the end. The final year before Lorne Michaels came back, Dick Ebersol, aka Cooper Hoffman, was like, "Oh, I know what we'll do. I'm going to hire a bunch of established people to come in," and Billy Crystal was one of them. So he was already famous when he was cast on the show as a comedian. That's also the year that has Harry Shearer, who ends up being one of the main voices of The Simpsons, and he had already been in This Is Spinal Tap. His co-star Christopher Guest, who did all the mockumentaries later, was also on that cast, and Martin Short, who had been on SCTV for like 4 or 5 years already. So that's a weird like 1 year contract like super team of these really powerful people who show up. So yeah, I think that thinking about, you know, I honestly think even Billy Crystal for characters, he had like 5 or 6 characters in that one season that got played like 3 or 4 times during the course of the season. So good shout.
Yeah. And obviously one of the best Oscar hosts of all time. So the second I remembered that, I was like,
always on topic.
That was I whiffed on that.
And she didn't pick Oscar winner Robert Downey Jr., who's also on the board. Don't forget.
That seemed like a cheat. I don't know.
I just want to shout out that I think we all know these people, but it is wild to me that Chris Farley, Mike Myers, and Adam Sandler, probably three of the top, alums from this show, most famous, go undrafted. But that just shows the depth of talent. And I wouldn't trade any of the people I have for them, but I just, if we're talking pure box office and movies, those are three big names.
Agreed. And also Chevy Chase. I mean, we all agreed. We all knew he was a jerk, but the breakout star of the original cast was only on for like a season and a half. But, he was one of the biggest names in comedy for a long time, right up until he became unhireable. And that was, that's someone who I thought had a chance to be drafted, especially in the wake of Saturday Night, the movie.
Mm-hmm.
The topic
I couldn't do it knowing what Milton Berle would think of me. So I just moved on. Can we close this show out?
Yeah, sorry. Let's just real quick.
Like SNL, we've gone way past when we should have.
Yeah.
Greg's Payne. Let's just real quick read our cast. Jen, do you want to start?
So I had John Belushi in Breakout Star, Kristen Wiig in Character Development, Kate McKinnon in Impressionist, Tina Fey, Weekend Update anchor, Kenan Thompson as the Glue, and Fred Armisen as Wildcard.
Excellent. Greg?
Of course, the best SNL cast ever imagined by man is Will Ferrell as the breakout star, Molly Shannon as the character developer, Daryl Hammond as the impressionist, Norm Macdonald, the only sensible choice for Weekend Update anchor, Maya Rudolph for the Glue, and all-time Ultra guest host Steve Martin for Wildcard.
Excellent. Antonio?
So I have Bill Murray as the breakout star, Bill Hader as character developer, Anna Goffsteyer as impressionist, Amy Poehler as the Weekend Update anchor, Adie Bryant as the Glue, and John Mulaney as the wild card. PT.
Awesome. I have Eddie Murphy as the breakout star, Gilda Radner in character developer, Dana Carvey for the impressionist, Dan Aykroyd as Weekend Update anchor, Phil Hartman as the Glue, and Julia Louis-Dreyfus in Wildcard. I would watch each of these versions of Saturday Night Live, I think. Pretty great.
Well
I'll
done,
say
everybody.
of the wild take, of all of us, of the long take, I would say Jen is obviously the Glue. I think that Greg is the Weekend Update anchor. He already has his theme song. I could not be an impressionist because there's not that many. I'd be playing like Bruno Mars and Andrew Cunanan, so I'd have to make my own characters. And then PT, what do you think? What would you be?
I mean, I guess I have to be the impressionist because we're too much of a group to have anyone be the breakout star.
That's
too much
true.
of an ensemble.
That's right. That's right.
Ratings and downloads suggest Antonio's the breakout star.
Great point.
Being humble,
Really
but
strong
when we
point.
get that Antonio bump, we really get the numbers up.
No, Bruno Mars, Andrew Cunanan. All right.
Antonio, where can people find you?
People can find me on Letterboxd at Aelefano, Aelefano. Greg, where can people find you?
Also on Letterboxd, I'm Ion Cannon, EYEONCANON. PT, where can they find you in the show?
Also on Letterboxd, you can find me at PT McNiff, PTMCNIFF, and the show you can find there at LTR Pod on Letterboxd. Jen.
You can find me on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jen.
And then we need this all wave at the camera and the piano song plays. And we all bow.
Thank you to G. Smith and the Saturday Night Band.
Here, where's our confetti? Thanks for listening. You can follow The Long Take Review on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive new podcast episodes as well as written reviews of films with Oscar buzz and new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.